Okay, so I'm recording and chatting with Terryl Whitlatch again, the author of The Wildlife of Star Wars and concept designer for episode 1 and also the re-releases of the original trilogy. That's right. And about the knobby white spiders, also called, I think now actually called the Kryknas, that show up in Mandalorian season 2, episode 2. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about? I've seen the Ralph MacQuarrie concept art. I think that was supposed to go into Empire Strikes Back, maybe. Is that something you'd seen as well and then got to run with?
Right, yes. That was where I first became aware of the knobby white spider, otherwise known as the Krykna. I did not, that name really wasn't there until the Mandalorian movies, etc. So that's new. The appellation is new. It's not a historical name that I know of. We would just always call it the knobby white spider because that's what Ralph MacQuarrie called it. The knobby white spider, for lack of a better name. So I guess some xenoscientist in the Star Wars universe must have documented and classified it and named it that or something.
There you go. I like that. I like picturing them going around, hopefully not accidentally stumbling into one of these things. So I know you haven't watched The Mandalorian, but it was a pretty horrifying, for someone like me who's scared of spiders, a pretty horrifying sequence.
I probably would have liked it because I like spiders. I think spiders are fascinating. Especially when you see the close-ups of their faces and they've got these big black button eyes and they're kind of furry. It's like, oh.
Yeah, we have very, very different reactions to that. So, but hey, fair enough. So was the Ralph MacQuarrie, was that the artwork was just a simple cell or frame or something like that, right? Were you the one to sort of flesh it out and decide it? At least in the wildlife book, not a true animal.
Right. It was more of a plant animal type creature. Life, basically you kind of think of that galaxy of where life can take many forms or transformations and things aren't necessarily what they seem. I'm thinking of, plants that mimic animals, like certain orchids mimic certain animals or look like caterpillars or whatever. Certain flowers have you look at them, they remind you of animals. I think of Venus flytraps, which are, plants have very animalistic behaviors and certainly dietary habits. So, why not think about, plant that could be somewhat, plant, fungus, whatever it is, could be somewhat mobile and then become anchored and then grow into something quite bizarre. So yeah, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, no, it's one of the examples of something truly alien where we can't really wrap our brains around it. It's not just a different color or a different size or something like that.
Right.
Although there are examples, now that you started talking about it, I was thinking of, I think it's anemones in the ocean. I think that they're ambulatory.
Yeah.
They're young, so.
And sea squirts are that way too. And those are very interesting pre-vertebrates. Tunicates, I think, is another name for those animals. It's like animals that seem to have, I think, a notochord when they are very young, as you were mentioning. They can swim about and then they anchor themselves and lose that and become basically this jug-like shape.
So in your book, that's what happens to the knobby white spiders once they get to be mature adults?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So also, in your book, they're in Dagobah, and that's something that makes sense to me in terms of jungle planet.
Mm-hmm.
Again, here on Earth, that's where a huge amount of our biodiversity is. So was that something you decided that they would be on Dagobah, or was that part of the directive of the artwork?
Well, I mean, that planet, as far as it's described, as far as we know, is, at least that part of the planet, is this big, huge swamp. Swamps are I'm going to say at least swamps in North America, in the Southeast, are very eerie places to be. They can be, and you can get lost and tangled forever in those swamps in Florida and Louisiana and parts of Alabama, etc. Okefenokee. And so yeah, you don't want to get lost in a swamp like that. And there's all kinds of interesting creatures and animals. Obviously we think of alligators, lots of cottonmouth snakes, which you don't want to get close to for obvious reasons because they're very poisonous. And cougars, pumas live there, all kinds of animals. Of course, raccoons live everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So in The Mandalorian, the spiders were on an ice planet. They crash landed and sort of found their way into a cavern. And I was thinking about how much that would be different. I don't know a lot about spider biology. It's not something I'm really going to look into just because I don't want to see any more pictures. But it's not something I picture in, cold climates. And so I'm curious about what would have to be different about them in order to survive.
I would think, I'm trying to think of, I know that spiders are found all over the world and in most places with the exclusion of the Antarctic and the Arctic. So I'm thinking of spiders that say live in the boreal forest, like of the territories up in Canada or Alaska or parts of Russia. I think they need to have a place where they can stay warm or hibernate during the worst snaps of it. And so I would think that these particular spider-like creatures, if they are being transported from Dagobah, which I'm assuming is rather warm and moist because Luke Skywalker was in his shirt sleeves, basically, or sleeveless for quite a bit of that time when he was there, that they would need to have a place where they wouldn't freeze to death.
Right.
And because they don't appear to have much bodily insulation, or at least a place they can go and be warm enough where they can go into stasis of some kind.
Yeah, they are shown in like a sort of hot springs area, so maybe there's just enough of that in the ground, enough like sort of lava presence or something.
Yeah, some geothermal. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And it's also shown, I noticed in your book, there's like budding. It's sort of off the roots is how it procreates, it seems like. And there is something very similar in the show. They walk into this cavern, there's all these just sort of egg-shaped looking things on the ground. And I immediately thought of the movie Alien. I think I just even said out loud, I was like, face huggers, don't touch.
Yeah, don't touch the eggs.
But of course, one of the characters does touch the eggs and then opens one of them, and then all of them start to open. And I was wondering if that's some sort of a signaling, in the animal world, once one egg hatches, is it advantageous for all the eggs then to hatch so they don't, they can start competing with each other or something along those lines?
That's an interesting idea, because usually a clutch of animals, providing the eggs are laid at the same time, will hatch at the same time. Sea turtles, for example, they all hatch the same time before their mad dash to the ocean. Crocodilian eggs, they seem to all hatch at the same time, and then of course the mother takes care of them. So I would think so. I think so. Those spiders themselves, real spiders, they hatch all at the same time. Octopus, I saw the octopus teacher. Oh my gosh, made me cry. They hatch at the same time. So maybe there's some in this world. Maybe I'm going to assume that all those eggs were ready to hatch, and so as soon as one hatches, it's time for all of us to hatch. So
yeah, no, it really seemed like there was some sort of chemical signal or something like that, which I thought seemed to make perfect biological sense under those conditions. So well, like I said, just because I'm scared of spiders, it wasn't a very fun sequence to me. I'm used to seeing them. I knew it was coming in one of the Harry Potter movies. It's a big part of one of the Lord of the Rings movies. These spider sequences are coming up if you've read the books, but since there is no base here for Mandalorian, I was It
Yeah.
was horrifying.
The giant spider. Well,
Right. Yeah.
when I think of spiders, you know, there's something different about experiencing, say, a tarantula, big furry spider. Like, okay, this is a big that can be a little intimidating,
Yeah.
as opposed to some of the smaller little spiders that you find in your house, and they're just working hard to keep your house clean of insects. And I think of all the effort it takes of them to spin a web, and and it always impresses me so much. And if it gets torn, they're there, Johnny, on the spot to fix it. And I think that's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to hear from people who aren't horrified by spiders the way that I am. Because yeah, I do realize that I have less bugs in my house if I have spiders or those sorts of things. Yeah, no, it's interesting if you when you get around to watching the show at some point. The
Yeah,
webs. So there's the crawling, but then there's also some coming down from the ceiling. So they clearly
right.
do have silk and they have webs. Is that something
Yeah.
that you intended for the knobby white spiders too?
Not really, because I was thinking of it more of a spider-like creature that wasn't necessarily a spider, but just kind of looked like one and grew up
Yeah.
to be something else. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't do that at some point in its life. Maybe, maybe the initial observations of my mythical zoologist for the wildlife of Star Wars was she didn't stay long enough to see the entire life cycle of these creatures. So I mean, it's like in the real world, one scientist discovers something about a creature, a real animal, and then another one some years later spends more time with it, and hey, we didn't know about this, but this also does this, and what we
Right.
thought was true is maybe necessarily isn't the final verdict on it. So
Yeah.
it's that's I think that's perfectly great. So
Yeah. I have field guides with question marks in them, for mostly since I got to see for work, the pelagic birds that no one has any idea where they nest.
yeah,
We still just don't know. We know there are these, albatross. We have no idea where they nest. So,
right.
so that could very well be true in the Star Wars universe. I like that.
I have a feeling a lot of that is true, especially in the Star Wars universe.
Right. They got bigger things to worry about, maybe.
They
So.
they do, and I have just not been able to keep up with the latest Star Wars episodes simply because I'm either been on NDA for the project or deadline, and it's like when I have not had literally times to watch movies, and because if I put that on while I'm working, well then all work stops because I'll be watching the movie, and then
Of course.
which I'm not being
Yeah.
paid to watch movies.
Yeah, that'd be a good job. So did you have something like that in mind when you were writing the wildlife book? You were talking about your fictional ecologist or something like that, and what kind of funding agency, what kind of
Yeah.
project would it be? I'm curious to
You-
know more about that.
Yeah, it'd be more like a kind of like a Star Wars version of, say, the National Geographic Society that sends out or sponsors scientists. It could, there could also be other grants from different universities and research academia or from various planets or whatever it is, um, in the Star Wars universe. And so this is one researcher's catalog of or survey of known planet fauna, and which means that this researcher couldn't spend years and years on just one planet studying just one animal. She had to basically do a survey, maybe spend as much time as she could, but she didn't have the luxury of spending 20 years just studying manthas or just studying knobby white spiders for that matter.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Couldn't be the Jane Goodall, spend an entire lifetime with one species kind of research.
Right.
But
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you would just have a book about one animal.
right.
And so.
Oh, I like that very much. I was talking with another group of podcasters called Let's Write, where they sort of workshop and then write little scenes at least of screenplays for various things. And we talked a little bit about a Fantastic Beasts, what Fantastic Beasts is for Harry Potter, if you've seen those movies or know about that. for the Star Wars universe. So
Mhm.
maybe it would have to be that character that you thought up. So
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love to know more about those projects. And
Mhm.
honestly, she would probably hate the Mandalorian. I was picturing during this episode, the previous episode having the Krayt Dragon,
Uh-huh.
and that doesn't end very well for the Krayt Dragon. And what if this person's rotation is just like a couple months behind the
Mhm.
Mandalorian's path
Mhm.
of destruction? What it looks like to her, coming across
Yeah.
and be like, oh, this Krayt Dragon lived for thousands of years,
Yeah.
and then showing up to this ice planet and finding, this entire group of spiders, big and small,
Yeah.
wiped out. So
Yeah. I think that sends a message loud and clear. Animals are precious um, on our planet. They are not an unlimited commodity. They are deserving of respect and care and love. Uh, and to just have a cavalier attitude that they're pawns to do, it's just a terrible way. That's just evil.
yeah, no, as fun as it has been to sort of see the natural history of different animals fleshed out so far in both
Mhm.
episodes of the new season,
Yeah.
I'm hoping it doesn't continue, because it has been this path of destruction on the part of the wildlife's part, at least. So here's
Right.
hoping they find some other plot devices for
Like
the next episode.
like perhaps that Krayt dragon actually has a clutch of eggs left over, and somebody revisits that planet, or never know, maybe somebody finds some eggs and takes it to their planet. And anyway, we can just say that maybe these little Krayt dragons are awfully hungry, and you don't mess with them anymore. And that is poetic
Right.
justice, Jurassic Park, but still, it's just satisfying when the bad guy gets eaten.
Right. Yeah. No, there's something to that, I think.
Yeah.
So at least on the part of biology and zoology minded people like you and I. So
Yeah. Yeah.
great.
Because at least, when animals did perish, and I'm thinking of the Rancor, in episode 6,
Six.
uh,
Yeah.
his keeper wept.
Yeah. That still gets me every time.
Yeah, I mean that he wasn't really just a monster. He was, a pet, a companion, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
there
and
is that.
probably a slave to Jabba too, in that, so
Yeah, well, at
yeah,
least.
no, that still gets me every time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So all right. Well, I appreciate you chatting with me about this. Like I said, I love seeing your wildlife designs in popping up in unexpected places, and feeling a little bit in the know. Like, oh, I go get my wildlife guide. So I'll keep it handy with me for the rest
Oh,
of the season.
well, I'm delighted that they're making use of those designs, and I'm glad that they are having a life beyond what the original appearance were.
Yeah.
That is very nice indeed.
Yeah.